Alpha Charlie 5-2, copy. You're safe.
4-5, received.
Driver, put your foot flat on the floor.
Many of you will recognise that voice. It is, of course, from the hit TV drama Line of Duty. It's about a team of detectives who root out corrupt cops. But how close does fiction come to reality? In this episode, we take you inside the world of anti-corruption units, how they work in the shadows to expose officers who abuse their power. Who does police the police? And why is there corruption behind the thin blue line? Welcome to the Crime Agents. Hello, and welcome back to the Crime Agents with me, crime journalist Andy Hughes.
And me, the ex-cop Neil Basu.
Make sure you're following our feed on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts, so you never miss an episode. And remember, you can watch our full episodes on YouTube as well.
And if you're not following us on socials already, we're at the Crime Agents on all major platforms.
So I've been looking forward to this one, actually.
Have you?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Talking about my corrupt colleagues.
Well, do you know what? I was a big fan of the show, Line of Duty. Did you watch it?
I'm also a massive fan of Line. We've talked about this, you and I, before many times. And when you meet a police officer and they tell you that all those police dramas, they're nonsense, they're rubbish, they are lying to you. There is a reason why we're police officers, and it's normally because we got hooked on a show. There'll be a whole generation. You know, I'm a Sweeney man. Columbo was my favourite detective. That shows how old I am. There'll be a whole generation of young cops who watched Line of Duty and thought, fancy a bit of that. Yeah.
And listen, we're going to have a proper chat about how realistic it is later in,
I look forward to
the
that.
podcast. But let's go to reality now. Anti-corruption units.
Grim reality, I would say.
So am I right in thinking that you have actually worked in anti-corruption?
I spent 4 years in professional standards.
How does it work then?
So I'll talk about the Metropolitan Police because I know about that, but every police force has a professional standards department. So
they need one.
Well, they do. I mean, you can go all the way back to Sir Robert Mark in 1972 when he became commissioner. He was known as the commissioner who cleaned up the Met. So he was brought in from outside the Met. His opening line was, I think a good police force is one that catches more criminals than it employs. Which I thought was hilarious and also absolutely correct. So having spent 4 years in it, I'll very briefly, quickly describe the structure.
Go on.
So you have basically an intelligence cell. So it works very much like the way we target organised criminals and gangs. We are targeting organised criminals and gangs. They just happen to be carrying badges. So you have an intelligence cell that works out, where the bad guys are, what they're doing, seeks to develop the intelligence on them using all kinds of covert policing methods, the same methods we'd use against major criminals, and some of these cops, by the way, are major criminals. Then you have what they call the Anti-Corruption Command, and they are dealing with the highest level of criminality. So they're dealing with some pretty major...
What we're talking
players.
about, like bribery, are we talking about higher than that?
A lot higher than that.
Really?
So we dealt with cases of conspiracy to commit murder, working for organised criminal gangs,
police officers,
selling the names of informants who later ended up dead.
It's proper dark stuff.
Recycling Class A drugs. So basically robbing drug dealers, seizing the proceeds and then selling on some of the drugs.
You see it in the movies. You don't think it happens.
But
it does.
This all happens. And then the second level is called Internal Investigations Command. And Internal Investigation Command does deal with criminality, but it tends to be lower level misconduct and malfeasance. And it also deals with investigating deaths following contact by police, which is an incredibly, if a death of someone is caused either by somebody being arrested or taken into custody or being chased by police, or happens because police have investigated them or been at their house within a short period of time, that has to be fully investigated openly and transparently. And that command does that. And then the final level within the police itself, so these are police officers within their own police force, are the managers themselves, the leaders, the sergeants and above, who are responsible for classic old advice, management action, and what we call reflective practice these days, which is basically saying you made a mistake. Do you recognise you made the mistake? What can I do to either retrain you or make you realise that you won't get a second chance if you do this again? So the lowest level of management action. All of those combined together are what keeps professional standards where they should be. And an organisation where professional standards has got to be the absolute heart of what we do.
I'm really interested by the fact that you hear all the time about officers who work in, anti-corruption. They get shunned by normal officers, if you want to call them that.
Well, I didn't get invited to a leaving do for 3 years.
Did you not?
If that tells you something.
Well, there you go. That's
it's a
where I was
little
going
bit
with it.
anecdotal.
Yeah.
Maybe I just nobody wanted
You like
me.
a leaving do as well.
Well, I know, and maybe just nobody wanted to have a drink
it's
with
free
me.
drink.
I don't know.
That's why you like it.
Only when you get senior. When you're junior, you have to buy the drink for all the senior officers. So.
Yeah, and in fact, I spoke to. Well, I know one officer, and he was kind of undergoing his sergeant exams. So, but the only place that they really had a spot for him was in anti-corruption. So he was offered, listen, you can be a sergeant, you can go to anti-corruption. He said no chance, and he said, I'm not joining the rat squad. He called it. Have you heard it called that?
I've not heard it called the rat squad, no, but
No.
I understand where that mentality comes from. By the way, I think you made a fundamental mistake, but I assume this was a few years ago.
It was I would say about 6 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, because of course Mark Rowley came in as commissioner in 2022, straight after the Louise Casey report that found the Met racist, misogynistic, homophobic, institutionally prejudiced, basically, but also, with a history of sort of major investigations in policing showing levels of corruption, from Hillsborough to Daniel Morgan, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry is still going on in terms of corrupt activity, the undercover policing inquiry.
Yeah.
So Mark comes in and makes professional standards his number one priority.
He
and I
did.
think
It was like, I'm going to get rid of the bad apples.
Yeah, and I think he was absolutely right to do that. We'll go on to the bad apples theory because I don't subscribe to a bad apples theory. I think that's what a lot of police officers, particularly senior police officers, have used in the past to excuse the behaviour of officers. They've said it's just a few individuals. In my view, it isn't a few individuals, and I think that's why we have professional standards departments, and that's why there will always be a need for them, and there will always be a need for them to be highly competent and highly effective. And the reason for that, and here's a bit of a history lesson for our listeners, you can go right back to 1829 when Sir Robert Peel, the Home Secretary at the time and a future Prime Minister, invented modern policing, and he invented it in the Met. He has 9 very famous principles, all based on the fact that the public didn't want police officers in 1829. They didn't want interference in their lives by people in uniform being proper fun sponges with what they wanted to do with their time. But one of his principles says the power of the police is dependent on public approval of their existence, police officers' existence, their action and their behaviour. He knew full well that any lapse in behaviour by a cop would undermine the whole principle of policing by consent. And if you can't police by consent, you have to police by force.
Yeah, and that operation you're talking about and that kind of shift you're talking about that Sir Mark Rowley led, that all came because of huge incidents and stories like the murder of Sarah Everard by a Metropolitan Police officer and the serial rapist David Carrick.
And the disgusting behaviour of the crime squad at Charing Cross Police Station
exactly,
in 2017.
yeah. It was just a raft of stories which were absolute disaster for public trust in policing.
I mean, this might be an urban myth, but back in 1829, there's a line that says the first 2 Bow Street runners, the first 2 uniformed police officers, one of those was dismissed for being drunk on duty almost immediately. So corruption goes a long way back, or bad behaviour goes a long way back. Why do you think
there's that old phrase, isn't there? It takes a good cop would make a good criminal, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Do you think there's some truth in that? And do you think that really kind of explains why some people who work in the police are open to corruption?
I think the danger is it feels like a bit of a stereotype. It feels a bit like the kind of thing that in a bad detective novel.
I've always found it quite true, though.
Well, as a detective, one of the first things you do is you go to the crime scene and you try and put yourself in the mind of the criminal so you can find out what their movements were likely to have been, what their actions were. It's one of the ways of catching them. And if you can't do that, if you don't have the imagination to do that, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're likely to be a criminal. But I've worked with cops who are self-confessed. They're kids who came from incredibly poor backgrounds with very little education, where they saw policing as a potential way out. And if they hadn't found policing, they would have been criminals, like some of their school friends. And they are open about it and they admit it. And they realised that when they went into this training, by the way, some of those were some of the best cops I ever worked with. but they were happy they'd chosen the right path. Some people go in, but they're weak and they choose the wrong path once they're inside the police service. And that is a problem that's always going to exist. Policing is if you think about the power you get as a police officer, that badge gives you tremendous power over other citizens. There is no other public service or any other job where you get that power over the citizens of your own country. It's not the military, therefore overseas action. You don't want military on the streets.
Yeah.
Policing is the most powerful organisation in terms of being able to deprive you of your liberty, to stop you when you don't want to be stopped, to speak to you when you don't want to be spoken to, and to lay hands on you when you've committed an offence. To deprive your liberty and your ability to move around is a tremendous responsibility, and it can attract the wrong type of person. So if you get it wrong when you're attracting people into the police and you get people who want to abuse that power, you're going to have problems. And if they manage to get in, imagine what they can do once they're inside your organisation.
Yeah, it fascinates me, like what type of character would work in anti-corruption, because it is a job that you're willing to be shunned, you're willing to be unpopular.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Mark has come in saying I'm the new Robert Mark, and not since the 1970s has any commissioner put professional standards right at the top of their agenda.
No.
I think that's true, and I think he was right to say it. But actually, the one person they miss is one of my very first commissioners, Paul Condon, in the 90s. So in the 70s, Robert Mark was dealing with detective corruption. 600 detectives leave the Metropolitan Police rather than get prosecuted. Mark is very successful, not in arresting and prosecuting, but driving out 600 corrupt cops.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what's really fascinating about this specific issue is the fact that, and Sir Mark Rowley's talked about this a lot, where officers who are deemed as corrupt or being investigated for corruption or suspended for corruption, they're still being paid. The Met alone are paying millions of pounds in wages of up to, around 1,000 officers who are suspended for either corruption or committing a crime, whether that be criminal or civil. That can't be right.
Well, again, it's more complicated than it appears, because what you have to do is you have to put them through a misconduct process. So you have to put them through what is a quasi-judicial process. You're a member of the public, innocent till proven guilty. You'd feel pretty awful if you were arrested, slung in prison, and then nice and quickly put before a court and...
Well, nice and quickly. I mean, there's one case recently where Commander was basically on the payroll for about 4 or 5 years or something.
Yeah.
And then eventually you had to wait for the whole process to finish. Because obviously, if you're convicted of the criminal offence, that's not enough. Of course it's not. We then have to put you through a misconduct process.
None of us like the misconduct process or the regulations that govern how you get corrupt and bad police officers out of an organisation. Those rules are set in police regulations, which is set in law, and chief constables and the commissioner have to abide by those laws and regulations.
It is a madness, though, that when you.
But it's Mark Rowley who's tried to change that.
Yeah,
he's tried to put pressure on the Home Secretary to say this can't be.
I'm
right.
agreeing with him. I mean, how on earth have you got a situation where a police officer who murders someone, and then another police officer who is Britain's worst serial rapist? How have you got a situation where they are convicted and jailed for these offences, and then after that they have to go through a misconduct process for them to stop being paid?
I can't remember what happened with Cousins and Carrot, but there is a fast-track process.
Well, it was immediately after the convictions, but the point is they were still getting paid. And
that'll be to do with prejudicing the trial. So you are... we all look with hindsight now and say it's absolutely obvious. It's obvious what happened, but there is a fast-track process that exists for getting cops out. So by the time they go to trial, they're not tried as a serving police officer, they're tried as a former police officer. That is obviously in the interest of every chief constable and commissioner to get that done. I don't know why it wasn't done in Cousins and Carrot, but it would have been done at the instruction of the Crown Prosecution Service, who were bringing those prosecutions. And don't forget, we all wanted those prosecutions to be successful. Those are monsters who obviously have disgraced the uniform and have made it 10 times harder for every police officer in the UK to do their job, which is the reason why bad cops, you're right, have to be out. And it's also the reason why professional standards units have to be much better at their job. They are because people don't want to do that job, this is the fundamental problem with professional standards in policing. Your point about the cop who didn't want to be in professional standards. In my day, we were effectively forced to go and work in that unit. So,
Were you?
yeah, I was going to go on to talk about this. Condon set up a unit called CIBIC, which was effectively the Complaints Investigation Bureau Intelligence Cell. It ran for 4 years because he had been told by two of his most senior detectives, we are losing serious criminal cases and we think it's because of us, i.e. we have corrupt cops talking to organised criminals and telling them how to get off these trials. He set that up for 4 years, found out that he used a figure at the time, I think he used 2% or whatever he said. It's actually a surprisingly low number of the organisation, but way too many for a layperson to think is acceptable, or for cops. And we targeted those effectively about 125 detectives and around 70 other uniform cops who were doing very corrupt practice. The targeting of those people has to be done by the best detectives. So there's two senior detectives, one of whom, John Grieve, is a great hero of mine. Dave Wood was the other one. They got to handpick all the detectives they wanted to help them, all the ones they knew were straight, but more importantly, brilliant at being detectives who could catch any criminal. They didn't want to be catching their own people. They didn't even realise when they started that level of criminality existed in the police.
Within the police,
for me, I only had 7 years service. I was a very young detective inspector running the surveillance.
Yeah, it must have been an eye-opener.
Well, it wasn't just an eye-opener, but it rocks you to your core. You think
In what way?
Well, because you think everyone's joined to do the right thing.
Yeah.
You know, and I think a lot of chief constables these days who haven't served in professional standards departments, they talk about the fact that actually there's very little. I think that's rose-tinted spectacles. Yeah. My way of summarising it in a soundbite is to say there are far less corrupt and bad police officers than the media would have you believe, and far more than you as a chief constable understand. And unless you put people into professional standards early in their service so they can see what bad police officers can do to your organisation and your reputation, they won't understand how important it is to resource it and to make sure they are effective.
I've never thought of it that way. Well,
neither has that sergeant who turned the job down.
Well, yeah, true.
And also, it's where I learned how to fight organised crime.
Yeah.
The tactics you find in anti-corruption are exactly the same tactics you will end up using against Mr. Big and the terrorist.
Listen, I'm interested to get into that a bit more. But we're going to stop for a break. And we're going to be looking at why policing attracts so much corruption. And I'm going to be putting you on the spot and asking you if it's better or worse now than it was when you first started, all those years ago.
I'd like to say I'm looking forward to part two.
So let's look at the different levels of corruption and the different crimes involved. I'll tell you a story that happened to me once, Neil. I was with the gang unit in Tottenham for about 3 months or something. And then I remember all of a sudden this team of officers just burst into the incident room or burst into the police station and just went straight up to a young officer and they nicked him. And then everyone was stunned. I mean, it was clear that none of the team knew that this was about to happen. It was the anti-corruption unit. They came in, they nicked this young officer, and then I later found out that he had been recruited by a gang to infiltrate the gang unit in the Met successfully, presumably because vetting wasn't up to much in those days. He was slipping the gang information. And what I found really fascinating was the reaction of the officers in there. They were clearly shocked and scared.
I'm not surprised. So I can tell you a story about what happened to me. In 1998, I was a police sergeant trying to become a detective sergeant, and I was one half of the leadership of Brixton Crime Squad. And the other half, he'd only arrived 6 weeks earlier, was an ex-South East Regional Crime Squad officer. And these people regional crime squad officers are considered like elite detectives working against organised crime.
Yeah.
And you kind of think, my God, this guy's going to come in and run the crime squad. I'm going to learn so much from him. And he was absolutely brilliant. He had the entire crime squad eating out of his hand. I might as well not have been there. They'd forgotten about me. I was learning loads from him as well. Tremendously charismatic, great detective.
Yeah.
Knew more about policing than the rest of us put together. And on a Friday night, I'm summoned before the DCI. It's very rare you get summoned before a DCI as a sergeant. He tells me, you're going to run the intelligence unit on Monday morning. And I went, I'm on the crime squad, one of the greatest jobs in
Yeah.
policing in a borough. I'd rather stay there. He said, well, you can go back to being a custody sergeant, or you can go and run the intelligence unit on Monday morning. And I thought, why has he done that? I went back to my wife and I was moaning like a drain all weekend.
Yeah.
Turns out that on Friday night, the anti-corruption command had come in, raided the officers and nicked the detective sergeant
What
who was working with me. He later stood trial for conspiracy to buy and sell Class A drugs and working with a corrupt colleague with an informant who they were handling, who was basically selling out fellow drug dealers and robbers and letting these two and their mates steal and recycle these drugs. So there's two things about that. One is, my God, you can imagine the fear on the crime squad. All these young cops in our crime squad thinking their whole office has been taped up, everything has been searched and seized, their other sergeant's been moved, so it made it look as though I might be in some way complicit. I think my DCI was he'd obviously been included on the raid. He's never told me this his whole career. He's never said, but I've no doubt. I once said to him, were you trying to save my reputation by getting me out of there early? Yeah. And he just smiled at me and walked off.
Well, so
that's
a yes, isn't it?
Absolutely a yes. But your point about are they shocked and afraid is a really good one, because I was. But the other point is, and I learnt this with my years in professional standards, is you think you know the character of the person standing next to you. Lots of police officers love to think, well, I can spot a wrong and a mile off. That's my job. Yeah. When it's your colleagues, it's a massive shock. Most people can't spot a wrong and a mile off. It's a myth.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And what's really interesting is that these anti-corruption units, they seem to work in the shadows. Lots of surveillance, phone tapping, what have you.
They have to. They're
pinging
trying to
phones.
catch major criminals.
No. But then all of a sudden they'll just appear. They'll just appear out of nowhere and then make the big arrest. And it just stuns the whole police station.
Don't forget, when I worked there, the location of the Anti-Corruption Command, CIB3, or the Ghost Squad as it was named by the media then, it changed its name to the Anti-Corruption Command when it was effectively put out of the shadows by a couple of campaigning journalists who were on the side of the criminals, who effectively videoed the Anti-Corruption Command and all their vehicles leaving their base in southwest London. So effectively then there was a lot of talk about the Ghost Squad, CIB3, being poachers turned gamekeepers. So your point about an old colleague of mine was from Battersea, was nicked in southwest London by the Anti-Corruption Command, coming in and nicking him in front of his colleagues and then treating all his colleagues like they might be conspirators.
Is that tactic done deliberately in terms of they're trying to see the reactions of their colleagues to see are they involved with
I think it depends
on
the senior investigating officer. I thought this was more like bullying. They only had intelligence against this one guy, but they were trying to make a point, because what they were trying to do is they were trying to look very, very aggressive about anti-corruption. They were trying to say integrity is non-negotiable. Look, this is what happens to you.
This is what,
But the most important thing is everybody, including lots of my old colleagues who were all mates with this guy, thought we'd fitted him up. That was the reputation of professional standards. That we would go and plant drugs on somebody. They would never have stolen those drugs from a property store and used them themselves and given them to their mates. That we had fitted that person up. That was the reputation of professional standards. And if you have people in your organisation thinking that professional standards are either corrupt themselves or incompetent because it takes too much time, then you have a culture of undermining professional standards in your organisation.
Do you know what? People might not think that these arrests and investigations go on to the same scale. Earlier this month, 5 people have been arrested. 1 from professional standards as well. So we'll have to see how that investigation goes on. But these arrests and investigations are going on all the time.
It's painting the Forth Road Bridge. Professional standards will always be an issue for policing, and chief constables and the commissioner will always have to take it seriously. And my advice to all of them is, it's quite funny, when I ran I directed the Strategic Command course in 2021, so all of these are future chief constables, potentially. They're all training to become assistant chief constables. Many of them are already temporary assistant chief constables, and 20 of 40 of them had run their own professional standards units. So the question I asked, knowing the answer, classic barrister's tactic, was how many of you were given all the resources you need and had the pick of the best detectives in your police force? And they all just laughed. Every single one of them.
Really?
Not a single one of them was professional standards prioritised by their senior management team.
Can I ask, that story I told right at the start of this section about this gang basically planting one of their own in the Met. How often does that happen? And how do they do it? Like, are they recruiting someone from their own estate? I mean, how does it work, Neil?
The couple of things I want to say is the first thing is major criminality in policing is not common. The reason we read about it and hear about it is because it is uncommon. And for the size and scale of policing and the police family, which is 220,000 people, you're hearing of very few cases. But even one case is enough to trash the reputation of policing.
Yeah.
So, and I accept that entirely. And we have to be better at not recruiting those people and turfing them out. So it's much more common for organised criminality to get hold of a corrupt police officer or to corrupt a police officer when they're actually already inside the forces.
So
that's more common.
And is that someone they already know from a previous life? I grew up in the same estate with you. Now you're a copper. Now I'm going to recruit you or put pressure on you or your family.
Yeah, and there are regions, you know this, neither of us were born and raised in London, which is a massive area and, 30,000 cops but 10 million people. If you're born and raised in a small town in North Wales, where actually, the number of people in your town is 1,000 and the number of people you went to school with is X and some of you became criminals and some of you became cops, it is entirely possible that there are corrupt relationships or relationships that they seek to abuse. There are family members who seek to abuse those relationships, who, not always because they're criminal, but because they think, or they come from a culture, the Asian culture is one where the family is paramount and being a police officer is seen as a respected, responsible profession. And actually, you're seen as helping your family if you look stuff up for them.
Yeah.
Well, that's corruption. And we have to warn police officers, you cannot do favours for friends and family. And you definitely can't have an association with criminality.
It's amazing that they have to be told this.
People turn up as teenagers and they don't. There is a little bit about you should understand right from wrong. But it's very easy for them to get seduced by the lifestyle or the behaviour or the charisma of criminals who corrupt them. Yeah. It is very unusual for criminals to actually recruit somebody and tell them to go and apply to be a police officer or apply to be a member of police staff. But it has happened. It has happened.
So, Neil, what's it like now? Is it better or worse than when you started?
Well, it was terrible in the 1970s. We've discussed that. It wasn't great in the 80s. Miscarriages of justice like Guildford 4 and Birmingham 6 were huge cause célèbres at the time, causing policing's reputation to suffer. Policing has always rebounded from that level of corruption in those days, and largely because of the invention of the Crown Prosecution Service as an independent body, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, both of those things happening in 1984. And post-1984, it actually became a lot harder for corrupt police officers to fit people up and cause miscarriages of justice or to work with organised criminals because there were more safeguards into the way they actually did their job. It didn't mean it was eradicated. I was in professional standards in the 90s and early noughties, and I've already described how problematic that was. But actually, as a proportion of our organisation, it's very small. And actually, British people should feel, somewhat reassured by the fact that compared to most police forces around the world, police officers until relatively recently were well paid with terms and conditions that were good enough that wouldn't subject them to the possibility of being bribed or corrupted.
Because that was a big factor, wasn't it? These low wages.
Oh, back in the 70s,
and just the offering of easy money.
There was a thing called a golden hook. So if you were involved in a road traffic accident in the 80s, people would say, well, to the victim, do you need your car towed away? If you give me a tenner, I'll get a recovery truck out here quickly for you. And the recovery truck would be a mate of theirs, and the recovery truck would give them a bit of money as well, and then claim it all back from the insurance company. It was called the golden hook. And that's because people were paid abysmal sums of money. So in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of that petty bribery, and to look the other way. You know, there was a lot of bribery in clubs and vice in the West End, and
it happens abroad all the time, doesn't
yes,
it?
and it's much more common abroad. You know, so if you get stopped by policing and you pay your roadside fine, you pay it directly to a cop.
Yeah, exactly.
That is a bribe.
You know where that's going.
Exactly. So there's a lot less of that, and I think what also changed was the way we handle informants. There were some terrible situations in the 90s where criminals were being used as informants. That all changed because we brought in professional confidential units to handle informants differently.
Yeah.
All of those things have made it harder, but also our recruitment and vetting practices improved. Now, they didn't improve enough. Cousins and Carrick, you've already mentioned, exposed the fact that our vetting and our internal vetting wasn't good enough. It was just one point in time. But I would, on the whole, you asked me, was it better than 35 years ago? Yes, and when I joined, it was better than 35 years before that. And people like Mark Rowley and his fellow chiefs are getting their heads around vetting and recruitment and making it much harder to join the job if you're already corrupt, and much easier to find you if you're inside and you're already corrupt. And that's a good thing.
That's a relief to hear, Neil, to be honest, because it was an absolute shambles before, let's face it.
That's harsh.
Well, it was. I mean, you know, we'll not go into the reasons why, but there was some questionable officers who got through,
absolutely, absolutely, and we've seen the evidence of that.
Right, so it's time for the big debate. How accurate is line of duty? We're going to be talking about that after the break.
Steve.
Sir, just to let you know, AC9 are here to take Lakewell into protective custody.
Hilton's been tipped off. Do not comply.
Will do. Thanks, sir.
Line of duty. I was a big fan. How realistic is it? Well, I think we're going to have that debate now. It gets some things right and it gets some things wrong, doesn't it? I think one of what things that jump out as being obviously wrong are, you know, you have basically AC12 who are working alongside the people that they're investigating. I think they get that wrong a fair bit. I think what it gets right certainly is the idea that this unit seems ostracised and seems unpopular, shall we say. Well, you talked about that earlier. What does it get right for you?
Well, AC12 is modelled on CIB3. It's modelled on the Anti-Corruption Command of the Metropolitan Police. You're right, you know, the fact that it's in the same police headquarters building as everyone else and they wander through each other's offices and they chat to each other is laughable, because you wouldn't do that. The whole point is you have to keep yourself completely sterile and completely separate.
Yeah, these units work in secure units, well away from the actual normal police force.
But they get it wrong. The only thing that they're getting wrong as such is that. I mean, a lot of the rest of it is... Listen, I know Jed Mercurio. I've met Jed Mercurio. I'm a big fan of Line of Duty, and if Jed is listening,
I didn't know that.
Please send a question in, Jed. But I also know... I also know... Yeah, absolutely. And I also know who Jed's advisor is. And Jed's advisor was a very good colleague of mine from the Met, who was a very experienced professional standards investigator.
Well, you have to say it's accurate.
And also a very experienced counter-terrorism professional from SO15. And therefore, what Jed Mercurio writes, both in Line of Duty and Bodyguard, when people say, well, it's rubbish, isn't it? No, it's not, because his advisor knows exactly what he's talking about. But not only does he know exactly what he's talking about, of course Jed bigs some of it up.
Of course it is. It's drama. It's entertainment.
It once took me 2.5 years to solve a murder. Do you really want to watch that every day? You know, it isn't like, you know, NSYS, Miami, whatever. We don't solve everything in 60 minutes. Any decent writer is going to make you want to watch it. And I have to say, I know lots of cops who love Line of Duty, but I know others who have not liked some of Jed's work because they found it rather sensationalist. Well, I came back from...
The Bodyguard.
Yeah.
There was a bit. It was a bit much, wasn't it?
You know, Jed, Line of Duty,
it's great
sensational. Drama. Bodyguard, I could take or leave. But it was, I do remember coming back to a big row. I came back from holiday and I went up to the 7th floor of the Yard. I'm out on the terrace and the management board are out there having a coffee. And I walked up and I hear somebody talking about Jed Mercurio. And I said, oh, well, a friend of mine interviewed him for a friend of mine called Simon Wesley, who was the ex-president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, does a brilliant sort of one-to-one interview session for medical people. And he invited me along. I knew him through a different work context, but he wanted me along because he was going to interview Jed Mercurio, and he wanted to use me as a bit of a foil in the audience, saying, I've got an actual... So I had dinner with Jed and Simon afterwards, and I was talking to him. I mean, the question I asked him was, do you not feel responsible for the way you portray police officers? And he said, well, that's interesting because my son wants to be a cop, and my daughter, Jed made his name writing medical dramas, my daughter wants to be a nurse. So I sort of think I must have got it quite right because I haven't put them off the profession.
Interesting.
And he's quite right. But Bodyguard, I came and said, well, I've just met Jed Mercurio. He's a great guy, and we should get his son some work experience, and it would be fantastic for the Met to... What I hadn't realised is while I'd been away on holiday, Jed Mercurio and Cressida had got into a bit of a spat.
Really?
Because I think it was Nick Ferrari who interviewed Cress about Bodyguard, and she said, well, it's just nonsense. I have to switch it off because it's just nonsense. And Jed had taken that very personally about his writing. And of course, I'd wandered into this argument saying, I know Jed, and I saw the deputy commissioner look at me like I was about to be fired.
Like, not now.
I was about to be fired. But one of the funny things was about, well, the Bodyguard having an affair with his principal, who at the time was the Home Secretary. So, well, that would never happen, wouldn't it? Yeah. All I can say is it has, and it's well documented on open source. So you might want to go and look at the details, but a bodyguard, i.e. a close protection officer, having an affair with their principal is not unknown in the Metropolitan Police Service history. So is it realistic or is it not? Yes, it's based on very solid police advice.
I think
there's a lot of realism in it, and mostly the realism is in the techniques that I think people can't believe that we would use those techniques against serving police officers.
I think our producer was getting a bit nervous there, weren't you?
I wasn't going to use any names.
I know who you're talking about.
I know you do.
And I'm sure Guy does as well.
And I think the world probably does if they look it up.
Right, one last quick question before we leave. What's your favourite ever cop show?
Well, I have so many of them, which is why I became a cop, I'm sure. I sort of grew up with The Sweeney, The Professionals, which wasn't really a cop show, but then the great American drama Hill Street Blues. Yeah. And the sergeant who was taking the briefing, the end of that briefing, which was, hey, let's be careful out there, was such an important thing. I always say stay safe to people now because it was such an important moment of care from a sergeant for his frontline officers before they went out on the street. And the music and the kind of the drama of Hill Street Blues, I'll have to give it a go.
You know, I've never actually watched it.
It's obviously. I'm not sure you would have been old enough to watch it when it came out.
Well, actually, one of the ones. My favourite is actually Prime Suspect, which is obviously quite old now. But I just think, especially when you speak to murder detectives, if you ask them what's the most realistic kind of British cop show about investigating murders, they will say Prime Suspect. And also it has these...
Helen Mirren was a genius.
Helen Mirren was brilliant. And also it had all those kind of stereotypical character flaws that detectives have, that you've talked about yourself, when it's like you just total devotion to the job, to the detriment of everything else, and also quite likes a drink.
Let's try and get her on the show because if she's listening, not Helen Mirren. I don't think Helen Mirren's going to come on the show, but Jackie Moulton, if you're listening. I've only met Jackie once, and she is a hero of lots of detectives. But Jackie Moulton was the DCI in the Metropolitan Police that Helen Mirren's character, Prime Suspect, is based on. And she's still out there doing some great investigative work in the media industry, and we'd love to have you on the show.
That'd be good.
Jackie.
I think we should make this a regular thing, kind of analysing cop shows, seeing how realistic they are.
I definitely think we should do that.
Yeah, let's do it. Right, if Guy gives us permission, our producer. Listen, and also you can leave your favourite cop show in the comments on our social media. But again, thanks so much for listening to The Crime Agents. Make sure you subscribe on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode.
We'll be back with another main episode next Wednesday. We'll have a Q&A episode for you soon, so please keep sending in your questions to us.
And you can send them by email to thecrimeagents@global.com, or including a voice note as well if you fancy, or follow us on social media. We're at The Crime Agents on all major platforms, and you can leave a question there. That's it from me. Goodbye.
And from me too. Goodbye.